All right. Hey, welcome. It is Friday night. Yeah, what else do you have to do on a Friday night but listen to Matt Dillahunty? Well, actually, listen to me talk about Matt Dillahunty. So, anyways, real quick. First of all, I know I haven't been around too much. I apologize. I'm working a lot. This is the only time off that I have to stream. My lighting is horrible. I apologize. It is what it is. You're not here to see me. You're here to listen anyways. So it doesn't really matter what I look like. I don't care. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is a couple things that I want to do reviews on. There's like 3 or 4 things I've got in the queue, but this was actually one of the most recent ones and something that I find to be one of the most interesting. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is a video by a man named Trent Horn. He's a Catholic apologist, pretty well-known theologian on Twitter. He's got several master's degrees. I think he's got like 3 master's degrees. And he made a video on the difference between claims and proofs and if claims are evidence or not. So anybody who's ever listened to Matt Dillahunty has heard the adage, claims aren't evidence. Now, many of us on Twitter have discussed this before. I don't know anybody that really agrees with that adage. It doesn't knows anything about philosophy, but we've all have said this is not true. And I think Trent did the best video so far. And yes, he's a theologian. He's a theist. He's a Catholic. But, you know, the genetic fallacy and all that, he did a great job. He actually really did point out why many of us feel that the statement claims aren't evidence is completely wrong. And it is. And it's something that Matt Dillahunty has used over and over again in debates. I find it to be very puerile. I find it to be very erroneous on multiple levels. And I think it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of epistemology when he's trying to make this assertion that claims aren't evidence. This is absolutely not true. We can show many instances of why claims would be evidence, and Trent does. The video is about 23 minutes long. I'm going to speed it up a little bit. So I'm sorry, Trent, if you ever watch this, I don't mean to make you sound like a chipmunk, but I have the attention span of about a chipmunk, so I don't want to spend 23 minutes solid watching your video. I want to go through it, put the highlights, and give my feedback on it. So anyways, we got some people out there. We have a Canadian atheist. Hey, what's up, buddy? Been a while. Got Willie Mays fan. How are you? So we got a little mix already of theist and atheist. Got April. Good to see you. Thank you. I'm not going to say that on air because I already have everything demonetized almost anyways. My Great Debate community is probably going to be demonetized. And these videos, for some reason, I have to get them all approved to have monetization. So by the time that's done, you know, the view's already over. So people definitely can't say that I've been doing these for views because I get very little out of them. But let's dive into it. So hopefully you can hear this. I have the speakers on here, and I did all the audio checks beforehand. So hopefully you can hear it. But let me know from the live chat. And all right, Trent, what do you got for us? Oh, this by the way, the name of the channel is Council of Trent. And I've linked the video to the description. So if you want to go check it out afterwards, please do. Tell Trent hi. He has no idea who I am, I think. But let's go. Hi, Dan.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Council of Trent podcast. I'm your host, Catholic Answers apologist Trent Horn.
Hi,
and
Trent.
Today I want to talk about a claim that atheist Matt Dillahunty often makes and what's wrong with it.
I want to talk about
But before I do that, if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would appreciate it. And I think you'll appreciate it because you don't want to miss out on all of our new content.
I liked it. I did, Trent.
All right.
I liked it.
So Matt Dillahunty has been arguing for atheism for a long time. He does a lot of debates. And I even debated him on the resurrection on Pints with Aquinas not too long ago.
I will add real quick that I don't think Matt really even advocates for atheism at this point. I mean, sometimes he will, but he's a lack theist. He advocates for the agnostic position, which I think is funny. But I didn't watch their debate, but I'm sure it was pretty good. I only saw the excerpts from videos.
One of Dillahunty's stock arguments he uses to discredit miracles like the resurrection is this statement: claims are not evidence. He basically says there's no evidence for Jesus' resurrection because all the purported evidence for it are merely claims that Jesus rose from the dead. And those claims by themselves are not evidence. The first time I saw Dillahunty use this approach was when he debated Mike Winger on the resurrection.
So what is it that makes something convincing? Or what is it that should make something reasonably convincing? Well, you have to evaluate the claim and then the evidence for the claim. And one of the things that Mike...
you know, it's so funny. Trent, I could speed up and it doesn't sound bad, but Matt talks really quickly, so it doesn't sound that good. And I remember this one when he was discussing this with Matt Winger. I think it was on Capturing Christianity program.
Is when he debated Mike Winger on the resurrection.
So what is it that makes something convincing? Or what is it that should make something reasonably convincing? Well, you have to evaluate the claim and then the evidence for the claim. And one of the things that Mike consistently did as he was talking was say, this is evidence, this is evidence, this is fact, this is evidence, when virtually everything that he was talking about at some level is the claim and not the evidence for it, right up to the end where he says, oh, well, this is the evidence for the resurrection. No, these are the claims about a resurrection. The evidence for the resurrection is something else other than a whole bunch of people say it, they saw it happen, or had an experience afterward.
A few weeks ago, Dillahunty released a video defending his assertion that claims are not evidence because, according to him, even some atheists have criticized him on this point.
A lot of people have. Matter of fact, I know Answers Reasons has. I know that Emerson Green has. I know a lot of atheists have, because what he's not understanding is when he's saying that claims are evidence, or claims are not evidence, when somebody makes a statement, you have to realize that they are making a statement about some conditions about reality. They are saying, this is how I think the state of affairs are. Now, they could be making it as an assertion, which would be a claim. Generally in Speech Act theory, if you are asserting something to be the case, you're claiming that this is how reality is. But there's also something called a belief, which not necessarily is an assertion, right? I can give you in a state of my physical beliefs or my physical brain states, or mental brain states, I should say, and say this is my disposition towards some claim. I accept it as true. I believe it is true, but I'm not asserting it as factual to anybody else, because there's certain things we all probably believe, but we cannot assert it as absolute fact to anybody else, or at least even just fact. I don't even know the word absolute. So generally speaking, when we're talking about claims and beliefs, just so we understand the terminology, a belief is a epistemic disposition towards a proposition that you affirm it as true, or you believe it's true. And then a claim is what you're affirming. You're asserting it to be the case. If I say this is the case, I'm making an assertion. There is a subtle distinction to be had there, although generally speaking, in most conversations, when people are talking about their beliefs, they're making their belief the assertion. And so sometimes when you say, the belief is the claim or the belief is the assertion, I see why they do that, because if I'm not just giving you a self-referential state of my belief box, I'm not just telling you what's in it, then I am making the claim that something's the case. I believe X equals X. Okay. If I'm not just giving you some autobiographical assessment, I'm making the claim that yes, X equals X, but they do not have to be synonymous. Matter of fact, like I said, you can believe something and not claim it, and you can claim something and not believe it. So there are reasons why you may want to have those two words have completely different meanings, and generally we do. So you don't want to conflate beliefs with claims. However, in general parlance, I understand why, and I've done it myself many times. If somebody says that they believe something to be the case, that they're asserting it to be the case, and but you can qualify that, and you can say, hey, look, are you making that assertion, or you just know what you believe, kind of thing.
So let me say what I think Dillahunty is saying, why he's wrong, and I'll go through a few clips from this recent video on this matter. So in order to show what's wrong with Dillahunty's claim, we need to understand what a claim is and what evidence is. First, what is evidence? Evidence is anything that makes a statement more likely to be true. Evidence is not the same as proof. Proof makes it unreasonable to deny a statement. Evidence just makes a statement more likely to be true, but the statement could still be denied.
Yeah, I do actually agree with that to a point. In hypothesizing something, when you have hypothesis testing, evidence is what's more likely that the hypothesis you pick is the correct one. Okay, so evidence is what is more likely to be something to be true. However, I would also say that if the evidence is sufficient, even though it's not a proof, you are epistemically obligated to believe something. So there could be such strong evidence, and if you fail to believe it, you might be irrational, even though it's not a proof. So you don't have to prove something to actually believe it. Proofs, even still, you can have a strong argument that is a valid and sound proof, but some people may not accept the proof. They might not find it convincing enough. It depends on the proof, I guess. Because what some people find to be a proof isn't actually a proof, even though it is valid and sound to them. It is not to somebody else, because you're already assuming the premises are true. If I say something along the lines of 1 + 1 = 3 or God exists, it is not the case that 1 + 1 = 3, therefore God exists. That's a valid argument. That's a disjunction. It's called a disjunctive syllogism. That's valid. It's also sound to a theist. Why is it sound to a theist? Because they're going to hold the proposition that God exists as true, and they're going to deny the first disjunct, right? Because 1 + 1 clearly does not equal 3. So they'll say, okay, it's one or the other. It's not this one. It must be the other one. That's logical reasoning. So they're going to say that's valid and sound. But to an atheist or an agnostic, they're going to say no. First of all, we hold that both of them are, or the atheist would say both propositions are false. And to an agnostic, it's like it's unknown. And so they're not going to accept the first premise as being sound. That's the difference. Because it's not going to be a proof to them, even though it is a proof to somebody else. Well, technically, I wouldn't even want to. I would say it is proof to somebody else, but not a proof. There you go. Because you're not really proving anything because you're assuming something to begin with.
Dillahunty fails to understand this point when he says the following.
And so if a piece of evidence can consistently be used to support multiple different hypotheses, then it's not evidence for any of them distinctly.
The problem is that in courtrooms, the prosecution and the defense will argue over the same evidence, since the evidence by itself doesn't prove who's right. It supports multiple hypotheses. The butler being stabbed with Mr. Plum's favorite knife is evidence Mr. Plum killed the butler, but it's also evidence that someone took Plum's knife and killed the butler. When evidence does support multiple hypotheses, well, you can combine the evidences so that when they're taken as a whole, it only supports one hypothesis.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. Hey, thank you, Siggy. Siggy became a new hole. Appreciate it, Siggy. Hope you're doing well. Lady Firebrand says that she wishes I should do more debates on science and religion topics. If I have time, again, trying to get people on their schedule has been extremely difficult. When I'm working overtime and over 40 hours a week, it's very difficult for me to get people in, and I'm working on it, and I will. Oh, hey, Siggy, gift us some memberships. Look at that. We got some green people. Look at all these people being greened. We got Green Worm now. Hey, Green Worm, you're green. Mom 3, Robin, Survivor, Tina, One Warped Angel, Christy. Congratulations. Thank you, Siggy. It looks pretty cool. Looks like people like philosophy now. Thank you. That's awesome. And then you got Nikki, too, out there. Nikki was hiding. She wasn't saying much, but hi, Nikki. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Siggy. Okay, so I lost my train of thought. Thank you. Appreciate it, Siggy. That was awesome. Okay, so when you're talking about what's likelihood for hypotheses, there are many things that can be considered evidential towards particular hypotheses. Okay? And unfortunately, though, just because something is congruent with a particular hypothesis doesn't mean it's the best choice. There's something still called theoretical virtues that Oppie argues. And these theoretical virtues have things like fidelity and simplicity and parsimony. And so if you're advocating something that is not a simple idea, like aliens did it, well, what would be construed as what aliens did? What would you expect to find if aliens did that? Well, look how my things are going back. My noise is going out of control here. Can you guys hear that every time it chimes? Yeah. I don't think I can stop it. I just see if I can. Yeah. Oh well. I'm going to do that 20 times, by the way. Thanks, Siggy. I don't think I can stop that. Hopefully, it's not too annoying. No, I thank you. But what we want to do is we want to have a hypothesis that is, something that makes sense, that the evidence that we're looking for is congruent with, but not necessarily accept something just merely because the evidence is congruent with that. And Trent will argue that the evidence for the resurrection by the empty tomb and the witnesses and things of that nature is congruent with what we would expect to see if Jesus was the Son of God and rose from the dead. And he's right on that. It is congruent with what we would see. Doesn't mean it's the most likely form of evidence. I don't know how to stop this. Is it really going to be this 20? Has it been 20 times? I just can't. I mean, I can stop it on so you guys can't hear it, but then I can't play the video. Oh. I'm just gonna let it ride. Thanks, Siggy. Thank you, Siggy. Anybody counted how many times it's been? All right. No. just when you think it's over. Just when you think it's over. I gotta wait because I should only do it 20 times, right? It won't ever stop. Well, how do I get it to stop? I don't know how to. I don't know how to make it stop. 17. Oh, you're actually counting. That's 18. 19. Okay, so this should be the last one, hopefully. Is that 20? Is that 20? Oh my goodness. No, April! 21. I don't know how to stop this. Siggy's $5. I hope not every time a new member sends a message. Sorry for the disruption. It's okay. No, I don't think so. I think it's just the notification that somebody has been gifted. Like I said, well, no, because I can't play the video if it's doing that. How does this going to work? Because oh, you know what? Hang on. That'd be on chat. No, it'd be on my. It's on my StreamYards, isn't it? That's why it comes up. Oh, it's done. Ah! Okay, so wouldn't it be on my stream? Let's just turn that off. I can turn off on your end. I know you guys can't hear it. Oh, here we go. Alert box. Okay, I just turned that off, so maybe that will fix it. All right. Oh no! All right, I'm deleting the alert box. I've deleted the alert box. Let's see if this fixes it. Oh no! I deleted the alert box. Why is it still doing this? Siggy $2. Stop notifications for that Tam and Chrome. It's not that though. It's from my alert box from the OBS. That's what it's from. It's from the OBS. But I've literally deleted the alert box. Okay, now it's different. Now it's different. Do you hear it? It's different. All right, I think it's dying out. It's still doing it, but it's different. Hear it? All right, I'll keep going. Thank you. Thanks, Siggy. All right. I think it's gone. Whew. So I was saying that just because something fits a particular hypothesis doesn't mean it's the best hypothesis to fit the evidence. That's all.
So an eyewitness seeing Plum stab the butler and the fact that it was Plum's knife makes one hypothesis more likely than the others. Likewise, individual pieces of evidence for Christ's resurrection can support other hypotheses beyond the resurrection. The empty tomb supports the fraud theory, or that the body was stolen. The post-mortem appearances support the hallucination theory. But when all the evidence is taken together, it shows that only one theory makes the most sense of all of the evidence. For example, since an empty tomb doesn't fit with the disciples merely hallucinating.
Well, yes and no. Okay, so this I will give Trent a little bit of pushback here. Yes, you could say that all the evidence would agree with. Oh, there's another person. Just I guess we had one more to go. So Higgy, I think you were the last one to be gifted. Thank you. I think. So yes, if Christ did resurrect, all the evidence would fit that. However, you can also say that it also fits things like. They were not hallucinating, but they were just mistaken, or they got the narrative wrong, they got the story wrong. It was just a mythos. For example, we know that when people are doing these faith healers like Benny Hinn and Peter Popoff and all this other stuff, we have evidence that has been faked, right? We have confirmational evidence that they have faked these kinds of things. Does that mean that no faith healing exists? No. But it means that by what's I call a holistic approach, holistic evidence, holistic epistemology. When you're looking at why we're formulating our beliefs, our holistic belief formation process, you're drawing on background knowledge. You're drawing on things that you've learned, you have new knowledge of, or you have beliefs of, and you're drawing an inference. That's what a belief basically is, an inferential belief. There's other types of non-inferential beliefs, but an inferential belief is you're inferring something from other beliefs. So if you saw somebody doing faith healing and you're a skeptic, you're probably going to say, well, this is BS. You may not know how they're faking it or what's going on, but you're not going to believe it, and you're probably going to believe it's false. Why? Because you have prior evidence that it is the case that faith healing is bogus. And so you have two hypotheses there. The person is actually doing the faith healing or they're a fraud. The evidence fits both. But what is more parsimonious with one, historical history as far as the faith healers go? We know they're frauds. At least I believe they're frauds. Or I would say that I even know they're frauds. But what's more likely the case is that, Peter Popoff really developed some kind of magical connection with God or something, or that he's continuing to defraud people because he did 20, 30 years ago, right? And before I start the video up again, I'll make the argument that we have a lot of people like Matt Dillahunty that will argue like atheism is merely not believing, but there are times where you're presented with something where it makes sense to not reserve judgment based upon historical information. For example, that's got a cup of water here. That's the only thing I can think of. A cup of magic water, right? See how it's magical? I could say to you, hey, I have a cup of water in my hand and it's magical, and I'll do this little thing with my camera. Do you believe it? And you'll say, no, I don't believe it. Do I say you don't? Do you think it's false? The answer you should say is, yeah, I think it's false. Why? Because you have background information. You know how an OBS works. You know how chroma key works. You know what a cup can't do magic. And so you say, no, I think your proposition is false. You're not just going to reserve judgment on it. You're not going to say, I don't believe you. The proposition is my cup is magical. Everybody out there that's a skeptic would say, no, we believe that it is not magical. We believe that proposition is false. That's not just reserving your position. That's not just fence sitting. That's not being agnostic. That's not even being a critical thinker, right? And I see a lot of atheists do that, right? They actually will like, oh, I don't want to make a claim that your cup isn't magical. But I'm like, but you believe it. Well, I don't use the word believe. It's so nonsensical that they're willing to throw away solid, rational epistemology merely to avoid using words like belief, and Matt Dillahunty has talked about before, or to make a claim. Hey, Steve, I'm claiming your cup is not magical. I believe it, and I'm claiming it. Everyone in my audience should make that claim. If you don't, then I wouldn't consider you to be a rational thinker. Why? Because we have background information to understand that cups are not magical, that we understand how this technology works. And every one of you, when I say, hey, my cup is magical, you should be saying, Steve, we are making the claim that you're wrong. Does that make sense? But would it fit the hypothesis if the cup was magical? Sure, I guess. Would it matter? And by the way, it really is just water. All right, let's go. Peter ripoff, yeah.
Now, if Dillahunty is only saying that claims are not proof, or that merely claiming something happened doesn't always prove it happened, well, then he's right.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
People make false claims.
Sure.
But people also make true claims. And here's what's important. The claims themselves are what lead us to believe a statement is true, which means the claims are evidence. And in some cases, the convergence of claims even rises to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. For example, if 3 strangers in a public park all independently went to the police and said that Smith indecently exposed himself, most people would consider that proof Smith committed the crime.
Yeah, I don't like the way he's using proof here, because personally, to me, a proof is a logical proof. A proof is a rational approach rather than an evidential approach as far as like science. You don't have proofs in science. You have proofs in mathematics and logic. So I understand using it as proof in a court of law, and he's not incorrect for using it that way, because using it as proof in a court of law, I avoid using the word proof at all unless I'm using it mathematically. I mean, you may be in a court of law, but you got to be real careful here. But he's absolutely right, though. The testimony of the 3 witnesses is evidence. They're making the assertions that the person did this. They are making the claim that the person did this. This is something to be evaluated. In the most sensu lato, broadest way, the word evidence is used also as what is being offered for evaluation. What is your evidence for something? Well, let me show you. That's what I'm offering to you. And there's different stages of conviction on that evidence. You can say it's weak evidence. You can say it's mediocre evidence. You can say it's strong evidence. You can say it's convincing evidence. You can say it's extremely strong evidence. There's a lot of different adjectives you can add to the levels of how you want to evaluate that evidence. Some evidence is stronger than others. Weak evidence may not be convincing. A lot of weak evidence, circumstantial evidence, may be convincing. People have been convicted on weak evidence, but it's, again, a collection of it. If you ask 1,000 witnesses and they all have said they saw this particular person do something, they're going to probably be convicted on those assertions because those assertions are evidential. Doesn't mean the person actually did, though, right? But you can still claim it. You can claim, yeah, you know what? I'm claiming that they did. Why? Well, based upon the evidence of the 1,000 people testimonies. It would be irrational to do that. Okay, that's not an irrational approach. Now, if you said, well, this person did it for certainty because of the testimony of 1,000 people, that would not make sense, right? Clearly, even 1,000 people could be wrong. Certainty requires a lot more than that.
Even apart from other facts that would confirm this unrepeatable event, like surveillance footage. That's why we can make a case for something like Christ's resurrection based on claims from people like Paul, who saw the risen Jesus, and the gospel authors who knew the disciples. Intersecting claims from sources that have nothing to gain and everything to lose from making a false claim become powerful evidence that an event happened.
Yeah, that kind of goes to the whole 5 nominal facts of God, of Christianity, if you guys remember that. Now, why would they lie? It'd be an embarrassment, criteria to embarrassment. I don't think it's a great argument. It's not so much that people lie when it comes to religious things. It's that they're mistaken. We see people all the time make all these religious arguments, and they're just mistaken. It may not be that they're bad people. Not everybody in religion is a bad person, clearly. I'm not even an anti-theist. But we know that there are dishonest actors. And I've claimed many times, people like Ken Hovind is a dishonest actor. People like Peter Popoff, Benny Hinn, Richard, Cephalon Dollar, Joel Osteen. All those people are just bad actors, in my opinion. Now, do they all believe God exists? I don't know. Some of them probably don't. There are people that misuse religion in order to profit from it. And so, just because, the person's, hang on one sec. Siggy for 666 ARS. We've talked before about this, but I still don't see how claims in God's existence are evidence. It works in some specific cases, but I don't see how it works for God. Can elaborate on that? Sure. It kind of ties in when I was going, so this works well. When you're claiming something like God exists, okay, or you're claiming a miracle, right? You saw something that is unusual, that's out of the norm. Many people have claimed they've seen things that are out of the norm. And I believe that many people have seen things that are out of the norm. Doesn't mean they're supernatural. I've seen things that are out of the norm. Everybody has. These are honest people that have concluded that when they saw something out of the norm, they concluded it to be of divine origin of some kind, right? And I don't think that's irrational at all. I think that it's an honest approach based upon, again, a holistic belief-forming system that, based upon their priors and everything else, they're going to believe there's God. Now, again, that could be abused very easily, right? We already know that many people that are more predisposed to supernatural will also believe nonsense like homeopathic medicine or astrology or tarot cards. And yes, I assert those are all BS. I just don't merely not believe it. I don't lack a belief in astrology. I will tell you right now, astrology is absolute BS. It's bunk. It is nonsense. It's wrong. It's fake. I assert these. I'm making that claim. Okay? It's not merely a belief. Or merely a lack of belief. I will tell you, I'm convinced beyond any reasonable measure that those things are just nonsense. Okay? And so when people are talking about the claims and the claims of God's existence, they're relating to you their experiences, Siggy. They're relating to you what their reasoning is why they determined that it was a God behind certain things that they have experienced. I've been there myself when I was a theist, right? And so I understand their thought process. But unfortunately, there is a link in that causal chain. Thinking back, the most I could get to was there is something that has happened that I cannot explain. Would the supernatural explanation explain it? Yes. Like Trent said, it is a possible hypothesis. Is it parsimonious with naturalism, or were there are actual experiences that we go by day by day? No. But again, it is out of the ordinary. But even if I accepted it was a supernatural experience, something so beyond our normal understandings of reality, it doesn't get me to a God. There was nothing at any time in my life where it gave me evidence of a God. Now, except for maybe 1 or 2 times where you're like praying or something like that and something kind of odd happens. That's evidence. I will agree that is circumstantial evidence that might reflect your beliefs, but it's so far and few between. But at the same token, people pray to different gods and they also have those kinds of things, weird things happen. So is God answering all prayers, even those aren't going to him? You know, or if you're talking about a monotheistic Christian God, or is it just stuff happens and some people, weird things happen because law of averages, law of such. It's not the law of large numbers, but the fact that so many different things happen in the world, something's going to happen to an individual that's going to make it go, yeah, that's odd. You know, like what's the odds of getting struck by lightning? You know, 1 in several million, right? But what's the odds of getting struck by lightning twice? Whoa, several billion. What's the odds of getting struck by lightning 3 times? You know, 1 in a trillion, but it does happen, right? Very rarely, but it does happen. And so there's few people where it happens to so affects them that they will rationalize that it was God. Because again, I might not have something to happen to me, but you might have, and you might have had it happen more than one occasion, and then go, what's a reasonable explanation for this? Okay, God. But it's only because it happened to you more than times, just by random chance, you know? So when they say that their claims about gods are evidence, it is. A claim is if just one person claims something, that is very, very, very weak evidence. Because in order to have the claim, you have to have a person making the claim. And so if nobody makes the claim, there is no evidence for something. But if somebody makes the claim, now you have evidence. It's the same thing in the court of law, Siggy. If I didn't see anything and nobody's asserted that somebody committed the crime, somebody can say there's no evidence of that crime. But as soon as somebody says, hey, I saw Siggy did this, now you can say, well, what's the evidence Siggy did this crime? Well, this is the testimony of this person. Now that testimony becomes evidence. Now that claim becomes evidence because one person made it. Does that make sense? Because that one person's claim is evidence. It may not be strong evidence, but that's not what Matt Dillahunty's saying, and that's where Matt Dillahunty goes completely wrong. All right.
But in this video, I'm not making a case for the resurrection. I'm just refuting Dillahunty's assertion that claims are not evidence, because he often uses this statement to undercut any possible evidence for the resurrection.
That's true.
However, if he goes that route, then Dillahunty gets rid of evidence not just for the resurrection, he'll get rid of all historical and testimonial evidence we rely on every day to be rational. This shows Matt's epistemology, or his theory of knowledge, is just wrong.
Yeah, I agree with him.
I'll give some more examples of that in a minute. But before I do that, we also need to distinguish claims from propositions. Listen to what Dillahunty says here.
Well, we could look at a bunch of different claims, like Jesus rose from the dead. That's a claim. We could look at Jesus walked on water. That's also a claim. All ravens are black, obviously a claim. This video is terrible. Each of these claims are the proposition in question. They aren't evidence of anything that Jesus did. They're not evidence of what ravens are or aren't. And they're not evidence of the quality of this video. The claims aren't evidence for the claim in question. That's mostly all I've been saying.
The mistake Dillahunty makes is he conflates claims with propositions. Correct. As if they're the same thing. A proposition is a statement that can be true or false. The house is red is a proposition.
Now listen closely here, because this is exactly, I agree with him wholeheartedly. The mistake that Matt's making is that all a proposition is some type of statement that has the ability to be true or false. It's called truth apt. So anything that is, you can say that's true or that's false is a proposition. Okay? The claim is the assertion that the proposition is true, but the proposition is merely a statement. But if I assert that the proposition is true, then I'm making a claim about the state of affairs of reality, because I'm asserting that the propositional content of that proposition is true. So there is a direct relationship between assertion, belief, and the propositional content, but it's very, very nuanced, and a claim, but it is very, very nuanced. And I think Matt is just putting them in a blender and mixing them all together and saying, oh, well, Jesus rose from the dead as the claim. Well, no, that's the proposition. That's because that's either true or false.
And note that a proposition refers to language-neutral truths. So the statements, the house is red and La casa es roja, are different sentences, but they refer to the same proposition, because they have the same truth content.
Yeah, that's a transparency there of the referential status of the proposition, right? So if you can change the words in the proposition and it's transparent and not opaque, meaning it doesn't change the truth value, then that's perfectly fine. If I say, the cat is on the mat, or if I say el gato is on the mat, that refers to the same thing, right? Those are completely the same proposition. Just one's in Spanish as far as the noun or the subject of the proposition, right? So it's considered to be truth preserving. It's salva vertate. Is that how you say it? Yeah, I think salva vertate. My Latin sucks, but it basically means that it's truth preserving. And so you could do a proposition in any language, but it means the same thing because we're talking about the propositional content.
Here's some other propositions.
Hey, had another gift. Everybody's being gifted here. Sika says, in the case of the witnesses, I get it, but in the case of God or supernatural, as far as I can tell, it's impossible to prove the claim as this evidence itself. Well, again, we're evaluating things holistically, right? You're not proving anything. It's just what do you accept as being convinced by? You can say that I am convinced that this is the case. I believe this is the case, right? To a theist, they're convinced that there is a God based upon whatever reasoning they have for it. And that's not irrational to think that way. And then you can say, what's the evidence for God? And they can say, well, I had this experience. Okay, you may not accept that as evidence to you because you didn't have that experience, but they're telling you why they accept it from their standpoint and why they believe in God. And I think a lot of people ask for evidence. What they seem to be smuggling in is, what kind of demonstrable scientific evidence can you show me, even though science is precluded from addressing the God claim? They're saying, what evidence do you have? Can you show me a God in your hand, right? That's what they're really kind of smuggling in. And I think that's disingenuous because they're not really asking for evidence at that point. If I'm asking you for evidence, I want to know what your reasoning is. And I'll say, okay, well, I understand why you got to that position. It's not enough to convince me. It's insufficient. I grant that. But I can see why you evaluated evidence. You would also ask, do you have any evidence that would convince me? Do you think there's nothing wrong with that? The atheists do that, and I'm not against them doing that. The theist has a right to ask an atheist, what convinced you there are no gods? And the theist could say, look, the logical problem of evil, the evidential problem of evil, divine hiddenness, Schellenberg's arguments and Mackey's arguments and a whole bunch of arguments that, there's no God. And that's fine because if an atheist is going to ask a theist what their evidence for God is, a theist has every right to ask the evidence, what's the evidence there is no God? And don't just sit there and tell me, atheism is merely a lack of belief. If you're on that level, you're not going to like this video. But you have a right to ask for that. That's absolutely fine. And I think atheists should want that because they were like, hey, look, let me show you why there's evidence there's no God. And then give them all the rational, logical reasons why they believe that there is no God based upon years of philosophy. Because there's a lot of philosophy out there about there being no God. Just like there's a lot of theology about there is being a God. There's evidence on both sides. It's up to the individual to evaluate it. To say there's no evidence on either side is ignorant. Imagine being an atheist and you're making the claim there is no God, and some theist tells you there is no evidence, there isn't a God. You would think that theist is an idiot. That is exactly how Matt Dillahunty or somebody else would look if they said there is no evidence for God. They look like an idiot. Because what they're trying to do is smuggling in there's no scientific evidence for God, which is true by fiat, only because science is excluded from addressing the God claim. So that's irrelevant. So he says, how good or useful is made for anybody else? The evidence in the case is something I have to experience. Well, again, that's just one form. This is one form of evidence. There's no rational way to assess an experience. Is it for who has it? Yeah, no. Again, that's just one thing though. But you might read books on Christianity. You might read Trent's writings. He's Catholic. I'm not, so it's not convincing to me. But you might read it and say, hey, this testimonial evidence, or what I read in the Bible or whatever is convincing enough to me. Everybody has to evaluate it the same way. You don't evaluate it the same way as Trent does. You evaluate it similar to me. We don't believe, right? But you cannot put your own line of demarcation of what convinced you to somebody else because you don't have their knowledge. You don't have their information, right? everybody's evaluating things from their own standpoint and their own holistic approach, as I said before. And somebody could argue, well, that just means everybody's subjective. Well, yeah, because I don't think there's an objective fact in the matter we have access to. There is an objective fact in the matter, God exists or God does not exist. But I believe that is so epistemically off limit to us, at least for now, that nobody has any inside information. I think atheists, they're convinced there is no God. Great, nothing wrong with that. Theists are convinced there is a God. But there's not going to be anything that settles it, in any near future. Unless God comes down and says, yes, theists win, or for some reason we can demonstrate conclusively there's no God, it's going to never be something that goes away completely. Now, however, it might just go away organically. People might just forget about gods and everybody just becomes an atheist and says, yeah, all gods are BS. This might happen organically. And at that point, who cares, right?
Donald Trump won the 2016 election. Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election. Rick Astley won the 2016 election. A square circle won the 2016 election. In fact, there are an infinite number of propositions, and only a tiny portion of them are true. So this means that just because something is a proposition, that does not mean it's true. Just because something can be the case, that doesn't mean that it is the case. If that's what Dillahunty means by claims are not evidence, well, I agree, but everyone agrees on that.
Yeah, everybody agrees on that.
You need evidence to show a proposition is true before you can justifiably believe it is true. But one piece of evidence for a proposition being true is that a person says the proposition is true, or they make a claim. Remember, propositions and claims are not the same thing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying before. A proposition is merely just a statement that is true or false, but the person who's asserting the veridicality of that proposition, that it is true, they're the ones making the claim, right? If I say squares have 4 sides, I am saying that's a true proposition. I am making the claim that all squares have 4 sides. That is a necessary precondition to be a square. It's not a sufficient one, but it is necessary. So I will make that claim, right? But if nobody made that claim, then nobody's making then sure, the proposition still exists, but there's no claims of that proposition being true. If I said square circles exist, right? Not many people are going to hold that proposition to be true, right? I hold that proposition to be false. But if nobody makes the assertion that square circles exist, then nobody's making the claim. That's why the propositions exist, but the claim only exists when somebody makes the statement, the assertion that the proposition is true. You guys see the difference there between the claim and the proposition? Because this is the big mistake that Matt makes every single time.
If people never existed, there would still be propositions, just as there would still be mathematical truths. But if people never existed, there would be no claims, because no one would exist to assert that certain propositions are true. Consider these propositions. 1. Pontius Pilate crossed the Alps with elephants. 2. Hannibal of Carthage crossed the Alps with elephants. One reason there is no evidence for the first proposition is that no one has ever claimed Pontius Pilate crossed the Alps on an elephant. No one has ever asserted that the proposition is true. But there is evidence for the second proposition, because some people have asserted it's true, where they claimed Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not a historian. From what I understand, Hannibal went, from up through Italy, across the Alps from Constantinople in the Second Pyrrhic War, I think it was. I didn't know that was even controversial. He was supposed to take several dozens of elephants with him. Pretty cool. But yeah, that's a claim, right? And then historians would have that evidence. I don't have the evidence one way or another because I'm not a historian. I know nothing about it. But it is the claim that is the case. Now, as he said, if somebody said, Einstein took, the elephants across the Alps during the Second Pyrrhic War, then yeah, that's a claim that would be, have to be evaluated, but nobody's making that claim. But it's still a proposition. The proposition could be true or false. Somebody, Hidomi says, wasn't Matt's original claims aren't evidence based upon around the idea of this book says 500 people saw risen Jesus, which I say is a claim, and evidence not just sufficient? Well, no. Again, the proposition is 500 people saw Jesus rose from the dead. That's either true or false. Or Jesus rose from the dead. That's really the proposition. Jesus rose from the dead. There are people that asserted that. 500 people asserted that. And then there's proposition that 500 people asserted that. Those are different propositions. Can you see the difference? So first, there's the proposition that Jesus rose from the dead. That is either true or false. If you claim Jesus rose from the dead, you're probably a Christian, right? If you claim the book says 500 people saw Jesus rise from the dead, that's a different claim entirely. And that can be true or false. And so if you claim 500 people saw, or one person saw, or two people saw, those are different claims, right? But if somebody says one person saw Jesus rise from the dead, that's a claim. 500 people saw Jesus rise from the dead, right? Those are propositions that somebody, if they are asserting them, are claims. And I think that's where the kind of the confusion is, because when Matt says claims aren't evidence, it is evidence. If somebody is claiming that 500 people saw the risen Jesus, that would be evidence that Jesus rose from the dead, just on the fact that if that's true, it would be sufficient evidence that it is the case that Jesus rose from the dead. So them making the claim that hundreds of people saw Jesus rise, that is evidence, because they're making that claim that proposition is true. Again, anybody who's making a claim is giving evidence. It just is so weak that most of us would just like, well, we clearly don't accept that evidence, right? If in this case, I said it was actually Einstein that led, his troops against the Romans in the Second Punic War, you'd all go, yeah, that's nonsense. That's false, right? Because nobody making that claim. That's what Trent's trying to point out. Nobody's making that claim. Even though it's a proposition, it's still a proposition. So there's clearly a distinction between the claim and the proposition.
Of course, someone could assert right now Pontius Pilate crossed the Alps with elephants, and that would be evidence, but it'd be very weak evidence. However, when ancient sources make this claim about Hannibal, historians recognize that evidence is strong enough to justify belief in the proposition. So claims can be weak evidence that fail to justify belief, but they can also be evidence that justifies belief in unusual events that have never happened before.
I'm okay with that. I know this is probably where everybody's going to get on my case, but if there's sufficient reason to believe something that is just so out of the ordinary based upon other things, I still think it's rational. I don't think theists are irrational people. I was a theist. Many of you out there were theists. Doesn't mean we were irrational. We had bad belief-forming abilities. It just means at the time when we processed everything and we took that holistic belief-forming approach, our brains were telling us something that came to the conclusion that there was a God. However, as you learn more about these topics and you learn more about how beliefs actually come about, you have to reevaluate your beliefs. A lot of us reevaluate beliefs, and I reevaluate mine. And I said, this is something I no longer believe. That's how a rational thinker should do it. It doesn't mean you were in a state of irrationality when you believed in God, right? It doesn't mean all of a sudden you become rational when you no longer believe in God. This is a mistake that I see new atheists make all the time. Oh, you don't believe in God, you must be a rational thinker. No. Or you're a theist, you must be irrational. No. Rationality comes with how you formulated your belief. And if you can formulate your belief that it was based upon evidence that was sufficient enough to convince you of reasonable evidence, I have nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I don't have any issue with that whatsoever.
Likewise, me claiming Jesus rose from the dead 2,000 years ago, it's evidence, but it's pretty weak evidence for the resurrection.
Right. Just because Trent thinks that Jesus rose from the dead is not sufficient evidence for me to believe that. Why would it, right? I mean, Trent's not an idiot. He's never going to sit there and go, hey, look, I believe Jesus rose from the dead, therefore it should be convincing to everybody. No, clearly he's not going to do that, okay? He might want to say, he might get into it and say, well, let me give you the reasons why, and you could spend 20 years in Catholicism, catechism, and all that stuff, and learn about Catholic and become a Catholic, and some people do. I think wasn't it Capturing Christianity that became Catholic not long ago, and I think S.J. Thomason became Catholic. So something convinced them. Me, I went to a Catholic church one day, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I stood up, I sat down, I stood up, I sat down. I saw this big old thing of Jesus in the front on this crucifix, and I was like, this is not for me. And so I never went again. But to somebody else, it might be convincing. Catholicism is not to me. But I agree with Trent on this. I absolutely agree with Trent on this.
Jesus' immediate disciples and even opponents of his movement, like Paul, claiming he rose from the dead, that's much stronger evidence. The fact is...
Is it, though? This is where I kind of maybe diverge from. Is it much stronger evidence? You're talking about people that lived 2,000 years ago that weren't... I mean, I'm not going to say they weren't extremely educated, but they certainly didn't have the information we know now on the fact that most, if not all the things times we investigate supernatural occurrences, we find natural explanations when we go to investigate. And again, this is on, from an investigatory approach. If somebody says this happened, we go look into it. At the most we can determine it's indeterminate, but we've never determined a actual supernatural causation. Now the church has, apparently, the Catholic Church apparently has done that, but mainstream secular society has not done that. Science has not done that. And now, granting science cannot address the God claim, science still can address claims of the supernatural to determine if they're natural. Science can do that, right? If you see, water dripping off the toes of Jesus statue in some church, science can come in and say, why is this happening? Nothing wrong with that. And if they can't explain it, they cannot attribute it to a miracle, but they can say, we don't know. It's an unknown. But if they find toilet water and sewage going to the statue, which did happen, then they can determine a natural origin for it, right? So they can address it in that capacity. But yeah, I'm trying to read it. Chemo makes a good point. He's like, oh no, I'm sorry, was it Chemo? It was April. She says, she wasn't irrational as a theist, she was brainwashed. And then by me, again, if people are indoctrinated into a particular form of religion, I still think they're rational. Only because for them to believe is based upon the teachings of somebody they respect, right? Their belief formations came from somebody that in general was an authority figure, right? And so you could see why they held those particular beliefs, right? Indoctrination doesn't mean they're necessarily irrational. There's a distinction to be made there too, because we rely on our parents for a lot of things as we're growing up, right? We don't know a lot of things, so you expect that your parents and the people in charge and the teachers, they know more, and so when they tell you something, you're going to have a propensity to believe them to some degree. That's it's not indicative of irrationality. That's indicative of somebody who's rational, knowing that they don't know everything and they have to take leaps of faith, so to speak.
We treat claims like evidence, even as convincing evidence, all the time. Consider the proposition, my father has a headache. There are a ton of medical propositions about my father, nearly all of which are false. My father has gigantism. My father has dwarfism. But if my father tells me I have a headache, then that is a claim about reality. It's an assertion that a certain proposition is true, and it serves as evidence that the proposition my father has a headache is true.
And I think that's a great point. Pain is what's called incorrigible belief. In other words, if you experience belief, you cannot be wrong about that. It is subjective in the fact that nobody else can feel your pain, but it is an objective fact that you're feeling something. But what is the evidence that this person's in pain? They're telling you they're in pain. That's evidence. The claim that I have a headache is evidence that I have a headache. Now you can say, but they're lying. Well, sure, but it's still weak evidence, right? Not when people go to a doctor. Yes, we know people lie, but for the most part, people go in there with actual suffrage. If you got a headache and your eyes are watery and you have all the symptoms of a headache or something like that, most doctors are going to go, yeah, you've got a headache. But the actual evidence in itself is merely, I have a headache. Even if there's no other symptoms, the fact that the person is making the claim that they have a headache is evidence. And the same thing is like if you say you asked Trent, hey, what was the evidence that your father had a headache? Oh, the doctor told me. That's evidence. You don't have to look at the CT scans. You don't have to look at the any tests that they did. First of all, most of us are not medically trained. We want to know what the hell we're looking at, but we don't do that. We don't go, hey, show me the evidence that your father has a headache, right? What we say is, why did we believe that he has a headache? Why did you believe he had a headache? Oh man, he was telling me he had a headache, and I believed him, and I'm like, oh, okay, well that's probably evidence that he had a headache. Right? That's sufficient for most of us to go, yeah, he had a headache. Why? And then when you ask, what's the reason why you believed him? Well, because he said he had a headache. That's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to doubt every single claim, especially mundane ones like that, right? If your loved one told you, if your significant other, your daughter, your wife, your husband, whatever, your son, your cousin, it told you, hey, look, I'm really in pain right now. Wouldn't you be a dick to not believe them? No, you believe them. And what's the reason why you believe them? because they made the claim. The claim is the evidence. I don't know why Matt doesn't understand that. I really, honestly don't, because he doesn't seem to ever accept any kind of claim as evidence. To him, it's just a statement. I'm like, then what are you asking for as far as what is evidence then?
In medicine, the claim that a person is in pain is often the only evidence a person is in pain. Sometimes it's weak evidence, like if the person isn't sincere and you can see they're trying to get like pain pills to sell to other people. But if someone sincerely makes a claim about an invisible reality affecting him and he has nothing to gain in making that claim, then that's evidence for the invisible reality that he's talking about. Now, hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. Once again, that doesn't mean all claims are proof. Claims are evidence. They make a statement more likely to be true, sometimes only weakly, but sometimes they make a statement overwhelmingly more likely to be true. Yeah,
and also, though, it could make the statement false. When you assert something to be the case and the evidence that you're evaluating somebody, it might not have the effect that you're going for. It might have the opposite effect. You know, it might actually, they might look at it going, you know what, I looked at your evidence and yeah, your evidence shows it's false, right?
Now, Dillahunty would probably say that when it comes to headaches or Hannibal crossing the Alps, we have other evidence beyond the claim itself. We know that headaches, elephants, and mountains exist.
Okay.
But we don't know God exists. We don't know that resurrections happen. So those claims are totally different, and so they don't count as evidence. He basically makes this point when he talks about the claim, I bought a new car.
Yeah, that's kind of no true evidence fallacy. You know, evidence is evidence. It doesn't matter what you're applying it to. You can make the argument we've seen more natural stuff, absolutely, right? And appeal to naturalism, but that's not what Matt does.
When you say something like, I just got a new car, that's the claim. The fact that you said it is not evidence for that claim.
How is it not evidence for the claim, Matt? If I told my significant other or somebody, hey, honey, I just bought a new car, she's going to believe me, hopefully. And why is she going to believe me? Because I told her. People believe people all the time merely from what they say because there's a thing of trust there. You know, the evidence is the claim there. The claim. What are you basing your belief on? You have nothing else to base your belief on that I bought it or she has or whatever, whoever bought the car. What is she basing her belief on? Well, she's basing her belief on the mere fact that I claimed I had a car. Thus, the only evidence that she has is the claim, but because she is convinced that I bought a car. Why? Because, you know, obviously it's based upon other beliefs of trust, and I get that. It's still somewhat dependent on that trust relationship, but it's still, the claim is the evidence. Siggy says, it sounds as if the proposition here is that there's no way to access the evidence that convinced the person who makes the claim, which we will evaluate. Well, yeah, to some degree, but that's why most of us here are probably not theists. That's why you're not a theist. But Siggy, let's say God did come down and sat and had lunch with you. Let's say Jesus himself had lunch with you, Siggy. You know, you could rationalize it all you want, and you'd be like, oh, I might be hallucinating, but, you know, let's put that to the side. This is straight arguendo. You had lunch with Jesus. You're not going to be able to convince anybody else, right? You believe it. You're convinced. You had lunch with Jesus. It was a fact that you had lunch with Jesus. How are you going to convince anybody? It's evidence to you, but it's not evidence to somebody else because you experienced it. They might have things that they have experienced or formulated as a conclusion that you didn't. That's all. Yeah, you would believe it, but you couldn't demonstrate it to anyone else. Go look at the movie Contact. Remember, she blasts off. No, sorry, spoilers if you haven't seen Contact. But she goes to an alien world, alien planet, meets her alien dad. Or some alien in the form of her dad, comes back and all that footage is gone. And they're like, well, what'd you experience? And there was no record of it, right? You either believe her or you don't believe her, but there was no evidence of it. But she knows what she experienced.
That claim can be accepted rationally, reasonably. And we'd like to even say at face value, we'll just accept that claim at face value. You just got a new car. But that's not true. That's not what we're doing.
Why isn't it?
It's really not at face value. We have a mountain of evidence for each aspect of that claim. We have evidence that you exist. We have evidence that cars exist. We have evidence that people...
Well, yeah, it's inferential based upon prior understandings of certain things, but that's still irrelevant. The evidence of the person buying the car, how do we know the person bought a car? Because he told us. That's it. Yes, sure, we know cars exist. We know people buy cars, right? And we're basing that reasoning on prior beliefs. I agree with that, right? But the real reason of how I was informed that actually convinced me, what convinced me that or what convinced my significant other, if I had one, that I bought a car, is that I told her that I bought a car. That's what the convincing thing was. The rest is all foundational, sure, but the convincing evidence that convinced somebody else that I bought a car was me telling them that I bought a car. Would you guys agree?
Own cars. We have evidence that people get cars. We have evidence that people will tell you when they get a new car that they're especially happy about it or proud.
Yeah, I remember there was tons of hours of static on the tape. Yeah, I do remember that part, which was pretty cool. But it was erased, right? So she still couldn't prove it. She could say that she went through this time and there was a time differential and there was several hours of static on the tape, which would be evidential of the time disparagement, but not conclusive
about it, or if they're upset or irritated about it. All of those aspects come together to such that when someone says, I just got a new car, you don't need any additional evidence, not because the claim speaks for itself, but because the claim is consistent with the mountain of evidence that you have in your model of reality.
Okay, and that's a different argument, though. If you want to appeal to naturalism, because that's what he's doing, then that's different. If you want to say, look, I don't accept these supernatural claims because I appeal to, theoretical virtues, and I appeal to parsimony, and I appeal to simplicity and repeatability and demonstrability and all these other things, and therefore what we observe daily is natural. Therefore, anything that's not natural, I'm not going to accept without a sufficient reason to do so. A lot of evidence. I hate to use ECRI, the extraordinary claims extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, because that has major issues to it. Don't use it. But you still need more evidence to convince you. If somebody's saying a mundane thing like I bought a car is a lot different than, I was walking through a forest and, Jesus appeared to me and I saw Jesus, or, aliens abducted me. These are claims that don't happen a lot. And therefore, yes, I understand that you're going to need more evidence to convince you. I get that. But just because we haven't experienced any of those things doesn't mean that they're just wrong by fiat, obviously. But they are still claims. The claim that he bought a car is still the claim. It is still evidence that he bought the car. And that's what Matt isn't understanding. And this is what I think Trent's trying to point out to him. Even though you are building these things on other things, you're still making the claim you bought a car. And that's evidence that you bought a car.
Why can we rationally accept this claim about a person buying a new car if the claim itself is not evidence? The fact that cars exist and are sold does not provide evidence that a particular person bought a new car.
Right.
If I pointed to a stranger and said he bought a new car, because lots of people buy new cars, you'd point out my conclusion is irrational. Just because a statement is consistent with reality, that doesn't mean the statement is true. It gives us good reasons to think the statement is not false, but no reason to think it's true. What makes it rational to believe a particular friend bought a new car is because the friend himself asserted that this proposition is true, or he made a claim about himself. And this means claims are evidence. They don't merely point to evidence, since background evidence is not enough to convince us of many propositions.
See, by the way, this is why he has 3 master's degrees, because he explains it a hell of a lot more eloquently than I do, but he literally just said the exact same thing I was saying. Yeah, that was my point exactly.
That's basically where Dillahunty takes the argument, because he says that claims can, at best, point to the evidence that confirms them, like the car title with a friend's name on it, or the car sitting in your friend's garage. And so these facts are the evidence, not the claim about the facts. That may be why he says this.
That claim, in and of itself, isn't evidence for the proposition, because it's evidence for competing propositions as well, if you were to consider it evidence. The better thing to do is to say, this is the claim. Let's evaluate what evidence we can find that is consistent with the claim to either confirm it or fail to confirm it. The claim requires confirmation, because it on its own isn't confirmation for anything beyond someone made a claim.
First, in many cases, the confirmation for a claim is just another claim.
Yeah.
How do I know my friend bought a new car? Well, there's a new car in his garage. But what if he stole it and didn't?
Yeah, and listen to this carefully. Trent's, again, absolutely right. The confirmation for these claims are usually additional claims, right? You could always add more claims to a claim. Why? How did we know he bought a car? Well, there's a car in his garage. That's a claim. How do you know there's a car in the garage? Oh, because I saw the car in the garage. So you're making a claim now, but how do you know he bought it and didn't borrow it from a friend or stole it? You always could add additional claims.
Not buy it. Well, there's a title that has his name on it. But this is just a government document that claims he bought the car. And claims aren't evidence, right? What if it's a fake title? Well, I can go to the seller and he can tell me. But once again, we have another claim. In many cases, the fact of the matter is simply a claim made by one person that is repeated by other people. This also came up in my debate with Dillahunty on the resurrection, when he said there was no evidence that Jesus even died, to which I asked him what would count as evidence that Jesus died.
I'm asking you, are you willing to accept a claim of resurrection is reasonable in the absence of any physical evidence?
What do you mean by physical evidence?
Well, do we have, doctors' reports on the cause of illness and death, and then a period of time where they were confirmed to be dead, and then a period of time where they were confirmed to be living again after that?
Those would still be claims. Think about that, Matt. You're literally telling Trent that claims are not evidence by giving him what would be claims. The claims of the doctors, the claims of the coroner. You're literally telling him, what would you accept as evidence? Claims of the coroner, claims of the doctor. Those are claims. And they're evidence, sure. But do you see the major hole in Matt's epistemology here? When Trent had asked him, what is your evidence? What would you expect for evidence? He based upon the claims of other people. Okay.
Notice that the evidence is just somebody else's claim. In this case, a doctor's claim about Jesus' health. Second, Dillahunty's explanation also doesn't work in cases where there is no currently existing physical object, like a car in a garage, that is the focal point of a claim. That's why I use the examples of Hannibal crossing the Alps and my father having a headache. These are the kinds of claims we believe to be true, even though there is no fact that can confirm the claims are true. Not every historical or medical claim is true, but some of them are, which means claims are evidence. Like with the car example, in the Hannibal and headache cases, the background evidence is not enough to convince us of these propositions. The fact that elephants exist does not mean Pontius Pilate crossed the Alps with them. The fact that headaches exist does not mean the stranger across from me at Starbucks has a headache. What justifies belief in the headache and Hannibal cases is an assertion about a proposition involving Hannibal or headaches, or a claim. Most of Matt's argument seems to be hung up on background knowledge.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not against that. Coherentism would be a lot of background knowledge, right? Coherentism for theory of knowledge of how you know something, if it gels with the coherentist web of belief, I'm okay with that. But it is all based upon prior knowledge, right? But just because something fits something else doesn't necessarily mean that it would be more likely true. Like he said, if you just said some random person, that person bought a car, why would it be rational to believe that? But if my friend told me that they bought a car, then I'd be like, oh, okay, it's more rational for me to believe that. Why? Because I got background knowledge about the person. So I have nothing against background knowledge, right? But that's just supporting evidence. That's all.
I might concede everything I've said.
Good night, Higgy. Thanks for joining us, man.
And say that what makes a claim true, the evidence, is that it conforms to our background knowledge of the world. That's
true too. A lot of us will look at what our historical background knowledge of what we have so far, and as we grow older, that generally should increase on the average. And so things that you might believe as a child, you're not going to believe as an adult, or actually believe false, right? Like Santa Claus. If you believe Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy was real as a kid, as an adult, you're going to believe that Santa is false, unless you're a new atheist TM, which they're weird because they won't take a stance on that. Seriously, I'm not even joking. I've had more than I can count, lost the count of how many atheists have told me, "Oh, I don't have the belief there is no Santa Claus. I have no evidence either way. You're agnostic on Santa Claus? Go away. Go away. You're not a critical thinker. You're not rational. If you are above the age of 8 or 9 or something like that, maybe I'll go to 12. I don't know. But if you're an adult and you don't hold the belief that there is no Santa Claus, something is seriously wrong with your belief formation, okay? Because we have evidence based upon our understandings of Santa Claus, of why there is no Santa Claus. I am convinced there is no Santa Claus. I make the assertion there is no Santa Claus. Somebody asked me for my evidence of why I assert that. I can give them a whole bunch of reasons, which I have before, but it's boring. But I have my reasons for it. But to say that you're agnostic on a proposition of Santa Claus as an adult, it blows my mind. It just absolutely blows my mind. But I have atheists do it. I really do. So N.A. Odessa says, question, guys, is the fact that you couldn't even believe in something without the claim have any significance in its contents? Well, you don't have to have the claim to believe in something, right? If I saw Jesus, I could believe that Jesus existed without anybody making the assertion that Jesus existed. Right? I mean, sure, there's the historical information about Jesus. How'd you learn about Jesus? Well, somebody else told me about Jesus, right? Everybody learns about Jesus through somebody else. It's passed down. That information is passed down. I don't believe anybody has access to Jesus, okay? Even if Jesus existed, I don't think many people have had conversations with him in modernity. But for the most part, this is say, generally speaking, everybody who's learned about Jesus has done so through somebody else. And so if I saw Jesus, I wouldn't need anybody else to make the claim that Jesus existed, or any other being, right? If there's some fourth dimensional being that I saw, something out of outer limits, I don't need somebody else to make the claim that being exists. I saw it directly, right? So they don't have to make the claim. Now, if I went up to you and said, hey, look, man, I had this fourth dimensional being come visit me last night, I'm making that claim, right? That is evidence of it happening, but it's a very, 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 very weak evidence. This is why most people are not going to be persuaded by that level of evidence, right?
It's the evidence, not the claim itself.
And that's why.
Well, you see, if Odessa says, oh, yeah, basically, for example, the claim that I have $100 in my pocket, I would just, that's something most people would be agnostic on, right? Because it's a guess. I have no evidence either way to even formulate whether you have $100 in your pocket. We know that people do. We know that people don't. I don't know who you are. So I have no background information. So to me, I'll be like, I don't have a position on that either way. I'm agnostic on that proposition. Something that Matt doesn't fully. Well, I'm gonna change that. Matt does, I think, fully understand the differences between atheism and agnosticism. He doesn't care. He's just flat out dishonest. I've reached the point where Matt Dillahunty is flat out dishonest in these conversations when it comes to atheism and agnosticism. He will admit that I'm right on the whole agnostic atheism thing, and he has before. He either calls me Mr. Agnostic or the agnostics, or mentions my name somewhere down the line, what an asshole I am. But I am right on the whole agnostic atheism being nonsensical in the weak case. And he knows this. He believes it. Why does he believes it? Because I made the claim. And I gave evidence for it. I wasn't the only one, but I was primarily the main person that was putting out why agnostic atheism is nonsensical in the weak case before anybody else was really doing that. Right? So I missed what I missed on that, April, on Odessa. Oh, I see what you're saying. I wouldn't be able to believe that without the claim. Yeah, you would have to claim they have $100 before I can believe that, because I would, even though the proposition still exists somewhere in the ether, right? Right? There's an infinite number of propositions out there, right? There's a proposition you have $1 in your pocket, $2 in your pocket, no money in your pocket. All these propositions are out there, right? They just exist somewhere. But I wouldn't even evaluate it unless you make the claim that you have $100 in your pocket, right? And by you making the claim that you have $100 in your pocket, that is evidence that you have $100 in your pocket. But it's not sufficient enough to convince me that you have $100 in your pocket, therefore it'd still be a guess. So I really have no evidence either way, other than a minuscule amount of evidence that you said it, but it's not enough to convince me. It's still a guess, right? It would still be a guess. The guesses are not rationalized.
I say claims aren't evidence. They may contain evidence. They may point to evidence.
And you're wrong,
They may, in fact, be true. But the way to know that is by verifying the facts and comparing it with what we know and understand about reality and what we can discover about reality.
Now, I've already shown how in many cases the background knowledge is not what proves the claim. It makes the claim more reasonable, but the claim itself is what provides the specific evidence to justify believing a certain proposition is true. But saying that a claim can only be believed if it conforms to what we know about reality, that assumes we have a perfect understanding of reality. What if a claim changes our background knowledge? For example, if you told an indigenous Polynesian tribe, cut off from the modern world, about water becoming solid, they have no background knowledge of liquids becoming solid, especially through cold air. But your claims about the existence of ice would still be evidence for ice. Saying unprecedented claims don't count as evidence fails to appreciate just how weird our world is. It fails to keep an open mind and be a free thinker about reality.
Yeah,
in some cases, background knowledge is enough to disprove a claim.
That makes sense because, oh, hang on, somebody's at my door. Wait a second. Hang tight. Yo. No, it didn't work. One minute. Sorry about that, guys. That was my neighbor. My roommate lost her mom not too long ago, and their funeral's tomorrow. So she was dropped off some flowers for her. That was very sweet. Okay, so where were we at? Not to put it down on the show. Oh, hang on, I lost my headphones here. All right.
Saying everyone in Arlington National Cemetery rose from the dead contradicts our background knowledge that those bodies are still in the ground. When it comes to the resurrection, there is no background knowledge that says Jesus did not rise from the dead or he's still in a grave. The relevant background knowledge is that dead people stay dead. And that knowledge makes Jesus' resurrection a miracle. If dead people don't stay dead, then what Jesus did would not be a sign of divine power.
And by the way, I agree with him on that. Look, our background knowledge is that people, by the way, Jesus wasn't the only one that rose from the dead in the Bible, right? It was like 5 other people, right? And so, yeah, if what they're saying is true, it would be considered to be something I would consider to be supernatural and evidence of divine, right? To me, when I use the term supernatural, I'm only saying that there's a set of natural, and then anything that's not in that set of natural is in the complementary set of not natural, and I'm just labeling that set not natural supernatural. That's it. Now, somebody could argue that that set of supernatural is empty. It's an empty set, which would be a naturalist. And you got to be real careful because in moral theory, the term naturalism does not mean the same thing. Non-natural does not mean the same thing as supernatural in moral theory. But in this particular case, when you say something is supernatural, like bodies rising from the dead, it just means it's not in the set of natural. And what I mean by the set of natural is things from our ordinary experience that don't violate like laws of physics and that, you know. And somebody can say, well, if God exists to be in the natural world, yeah, but then it loses the connotations and the sense of what we mean by something that is so far removed from our everyday experience, dealing with the laws of physics, that it loses the meaning what we mean by non-natural. It's something that is out of the ordinary, being able to change the laws of physics. If aliens came down, they still have to abide by all the laws of physics. It's not supernatural, right? But if you're a being that can change the laws of physics, laws of biology, the nomological laws, the metaphysical laws, even maybe even logical laws, which I don't think anybody can or any being could. But that's something that, to me, I cannot put in the set of natural. So I'm going to put that in the set of non-natural. And a naturalist, of course, would say that there is no elements in the set of the non-natural or supernatural.
Also notice that part of discussing background knowledge will include whether you think God exists and can perform miracles and is a part of that knowledge. All right, let's summarize. Evidence is not always proof, but it does make something more likely to be true. A proposition, or what can be the case, is not evidence. It is the case, since there's an infinite number of propositions. The fact that something can be doesn't make it more likely that it is. But when a person asserts a proposition is true, or when a person makes a claim, that is evidence for the proposition. It might be bad evidence, it might be irrefutable evidence, but it's evidence that needs to be judged on its own merits and not dismissed through faulty epistemologies like claims are not evidence.
He's absolutely right. Look, when I do a mathematical proof or something, or somebody does a mathematical proof, like my paper, when somebody says, hey, Steve, what's the evidence of your argument being true? My paper is the proof. My paper is the evidence. But the claim is still evidence. My claim that usages of weak terminology for atheism lead to semantic collapse, that's a claim. It's weak evidence, but it's still evidence. My claim is evidence. But if you wanted to be convinced by that evidence a little bit more, rather than just believe me on it, you can say, okay, is there any more additional evidence for that for me to evaluate? I'm like, yeah, here's my paper. My paper's a literal proof. It's a reductio, right? It's valid and it's sound. Nobody who's read it that knows logic has said it's valid and sound. And so that's a proof. And that at that point, Trent had said, well, proof, if you read something and it's a proof, it should be epistemically something you commit to. You shouldn't be able to see a proof and go, I don't believe it, or I believe it's false, unless you don't know how to evaluate it properly. There's some modal proofs out there, like the modal ontological arguments and Anselm's modal arguments for God, that are extremely complicated, and most of us don't have the skill set to do it. And therefore, the most we can say is, I have no idea. I can't evaluate it, right? It's not convincing to me because I don't know how to read it. Somebody else might say, well, it's valid and it's sound, and you could believe them or not. But like, I have the background information to understand that they're all valid, but there's always one premise in there that's based upon a modal axiom that's questionable. And it's usually the S5 modal axiom in modal logic, which basically says that anything that's possible, it must be possible by necessity. Therefore, it's necessary. And a lot of these types of modal arguments lead to modal collapse, and where everything becomes necessary. So there's some problems with even the modal arguments, but they're not convincing to me. But they're very well articulated arguments. They might be convincing to somebody else, right? Because it is valid and it is sound to certain people. And I cannot fault somebody for accepting those arguments as being valid and sound. I just think it's contingent upon which axioms you want to take, and that's problematic with me, right? But it might be coherent with the rest of the things they understand. Like Dr. Josh Rasmussen, who wrote Necessary Existence with Alexander Press, he's convinced that the ontological arguments, the modal ontological arguments, are correct and that God exists. He's actually reviewing Stanford's Encyclopedia's article on ontological arguments. And he's got a lot of background knowledge to understand those things, which I don't have. But he said, "Hey, Steve," he even told me one time, he said, "Hey, Steve, did at least my book put you toward theism a little bit?" And he I think he said 50%. He's like, "I want to get you at least to 57% or something like that." But I'm like, and I was like, I remember, and I told him, I was like, it didn't convince me, but surely evidence that would at least be on that side of the fence, right? I can't read his writings and know that he's exceptionally brilliant, that he knows the logic, and read what he's writing and go, oh, this is completely wrong, because I don't have the background information to determine that. So I could say, okay, this is evidence for a necessary being. And if you want to say that necessary being is God, that's fine. But this is the fact that he's, one, made the claim that a necessary being exists, and then he's providing more evidence on top of that. And so if I'm not going to believe, Josh Rasmussen, merely because he's making the claim that there has to be a necessary being. I'm not going to believe that just, by fiat, merely because he says it. I respect him, and he's extremely smart, but I'm not going to believe that just because he says it. Now he shows me his book, Necessary Existence. I'm like, okay, there's a little more evidence toward that. Is it convincing to me? No. But it's still more evidence than what I had before. So everything has to be just looked at holistically, look at all the evidence. And by the way, I hopefully Dr. Josh Rasmussen and I will be able to work on something soon when he's done with the SCP on agnostic atheism. He likes my paper. I'm going to be on Braxton Hunter's channel on the 28th to discuss my paper, by the way. So I think this video is about over, and I'll get to my live chat, and we can talk more about that. Then I'll wrap it up because I don't want it to go too long. I want to be easily digestible. So let's finish this up. And
it can't merely be judged against what we previously know about the world.
Dunn said, "Hey Steve, did you watch Reds destroy the flat earther tonight?" Well, 2% in the vote said Reds rhetoric lost the debate. 2%. Therefore, that's evidence that Reds rhetoric did not destroy the flat earther. There you go. That is true. But no, I didn't watch it. I'm sure it was just fascinating listening to a flat earther talk about flat earth again for the millionth time.
Because this would cut us off from understanding new aspects of reality through new claims. If you assume that miracles don't happen, and so every miracle claim is not evidence for miracles, then you're engaging in circular reasoning. In fact, a lot of what's driving Dillahunty's epistemology is his metaphysics, or his previous assumptions about the world, such as that immaterial persons do not exist. Listen.
And he's right. And I don't have a major problem with that. I may disagree with Trent a little bit. If a person starts with the position that there are no supernatural entities, there are no invisible beings, there are no intentional agents that we call deities or gods. Okay, this is parsimonious with naturalism. All naturalists, by implication, would be epistemically committed to atheism. Okay, this is, again, holistic. But to say that you can never evaluate evidence to where you can change your mind, that is closed thinking, right? An atheist who says that that gods are impossible, that's a high bar to reach, right? They have literally said that they're so closed-minded that nothing could change their mind because it's impossible. They could withdraw that claim and say, oh, I was wrong about it being impossible. But that's a really high bar to say something's impossible. Square circles are impossible, right? X does not equals X is impossible. God's existing, not impossible. I'm sorry, you're just wrong. You would have to provide a logical proof by reductio to show, or some proof by impossibility, or something along the lines to show by logic, by necessity, that gods cannot exist in any possible world. And good luck with that, because if somebody could have done that by now, they would have. Nobody has. So I think when you have people like Aaron Ra stating that gods are impossible, they're just out to lunch.
Listen to what he says near the end of his video.
Someone believes they've seen a demon. That is evidence for demons. Is simply fallaciously circular reasoning.
No, it's not. How is that circular reasoning? I walk out, I see a shooting star. What was the reason why you believe you've seen a shooting star? I saw a shooting star. Neighbor came out, gave me some flowers just recently. So this day she came over and said, hey, Steve, I saw a shooting star. Oh, I believe there's a shooting star tonight. Why do you believe there's a shooting star tonight? My neighbor told me so. I believe her claim. She made the claim. It's evidence that there's a shooting star. Did I witness it? No. Why is this any different? Just because it happens to be a demon. Yeah, it's supernatural, but the principle is still the same, right? If people claim they saw a demon, that is minutely still evidence of demons. But you also have to weigh that against all the evidence against it, right? Because every proposition should have evidence for and against pretty much. And just because you have evidence for something doesn't mean there's evidence against it by any stretch of imagination. It might be preponderance of the evidence that it's against it, right? Like the whole 0.99 repeating equals 1. Is there evidence against that? Yeah, if you twist math, it's bad evidence, right? I wouldn't even say it's weak evidence, but whatever. For again, arguendo, there's bad or weak evidence that 0.99 repeating does not equal 1, but there's overwhelming good evidence that they're equal, right? So when somebody's objectively wants to evaluate something and they say, Steve, I want to believe or be convinced one way or another, does 0.99 repeating equal 1? Show me evidence for both sides. They can look at the bad evidence, and if they know math, can recognize as bad, or I can show them the good evidence, and they go, oh yeah, I'm convinced of the good evidence. There's evidence for and against, just like demons. There's evidence for and against. To say this is no evidence, it's just a cop-out. Anybody that says no evidence for God, you're dealing with somebody who's not even bothered to have a conversation with you. And so this is evidence when people make a claim there's a demon. If you believe somebody, why did you believe them? Well, because they had stated it. They stated this claim. That's evidence. That's the evidence you're predicating your belief on. It may not be wise to do so. It may be irrational even in some cases to do so. But the claim is the evidence, Matt. You're just fundamentally wrong on this. And I'm telling you this from somebody who talks to a lot of philosophers and atheist philosophers and theist philosophers. I haven't found a single person that has agreed with Matt that has an education on this particular topic. All the atheists out there that deal with philosophy have been saying this is wrong. All of them. If you disagree, I'd love to talk to you, but every one of them is against Matt on this. And these are atheists.
Not worthy of the level of debate that we should have for some of the most important questions in the world, like whether or not a God exists. It'd be really handy, though, if rather than just sitting here arguing about whether or not claims are evidence, God would just show up and present the actual evidence.
And that'd be great. And somebody in the live chat says claim is not good evidence. Depends on the claim, right? But but good and bad is something you're evaluating. Those are subjective measures. But that's not what Matt's saying. Matt's saying it's not evidence at all, right? He's not saying weak evidence or good evidence or bad evidence. He's not throwing in an adjective there, which would totally change the conversation, right? I agree with him if somebody says, "Hey, Steve, I was walking down the street and I saw a demon. What's your evidence? What's your evidence beyond that other than the claim?" Well, I just had the claim. Well, sure, that's evidence. It's testimony evidence, but it's not good evidence enough to convince me. Nothing wrong with that, right? So, sure, you can throw in these adjectives and qualifiers, and in this particular case, it wouldn't be harmful to do so. I think you should, but that's not what Matt's arguing. Matt's not arguing it's not good evidence. He's saying claims are not evidence, period, and that's just wrong.
Be nice, but so far hasn't happened.
You can see the flaw in Dillahunty's argument when you replace demon with undiscovered creature or previously unobserved phenomenon. It represents a closed-minded view of the world. Matt is assuming that actual evidence is some kind of physical object. It's why he says this.
If every single other human being on the planet confirmed to me that they saw George Washington dragged out of his grave, revived in public, and presented to all of us, I would have to say, I will accept that that is exactly what these people think, but I need evidence beyond that to confirm that that's actually what happened.
Okay, and I'm in the same boat on that, right? I believe if we're going to go by reasonable man standard and sincerity, what philosophy, when we talk about sincerity, means that a person's actually asserting what they actually believe, right? They're not being a dishonest agent. If a person is a sincere agent, then they say they experienced something, I will believe that they experienced something. Doesn't mean I have to believe what they believe is the cause of that, right? But Matt really hasn't really said what's going to convince him. Yes, he says, God is all-knowing, therefore God knows what would convince me, and that's true. I actually believe that as well. But it's still not a direct answer. It's like, well, yeah, God knows what would, but that assumes God's existing. If God exists, if God existed, he would know. But to me, if God came down and had a conversation with me and affected my life in such a way that I just couldn't deny it, I'm convinced. Big deal. Not a big deal. But there are some people that I think they say nothing can convince them, but that's being epistemically closed-minded. If Matt Dillahunty had, like I said, Jesus come down and have a conversation with him, sure, he could argue that he's having his hallucinations and all this other stuff, but let's just say it affected his life, that it just be irrational not to believe at that point. Then he should be saying to people that's what it would convince me. But he doesn't say that because I don't think he believes they're impossible. Don't quote me on that. I know Aaron Ra and Shannon Q believe that gods are impossible. But again, nobody's ever been able to prove something like that. It's ridiculous. But I don't think he holds that particular position, right? Does he? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But again, what would convince him? You have to be able to have some kind of measure by which you would change your mind, or you are epistemically closed off, right? I mean, but especially when atheists say, well, give enough evidence, I believe, just pretty much anything. Okay. For example, like square circles. I believe they're impossible. What would convince me they're not? I wouldn't even know where to begin to tell you what would convince me. I don't have an answer to that. I really honestly don't. Right? I could not tell you. I would just tell you is that I would, if I saw a square circle, maybe, but I don't know how to evaluate it if I actually saw one, right? I wouldn't even know, I can't even conceptualize what a square circle even is. So
fully accept something happened that convinced these people that that's what it was, but I can't merely take their word for it.
Okay, that's
ironically,
fine.
This is the kind of thinking that causes people to believe in pseudoscience.
Well, yes and no. Before Trent goes on, I don't have a problem with what Matt's saying, particularly there, in that just because you have 1 billion people that believe in Christianity, yes, it is evidence, but I don't have a problem with going, well, I don't accept it. It's like 1 billion people believe in Islam. I don't accept it, right? And yes, Trent is correct that it could lead you to pseudoscience, but in general, when you have the testimony of other people, you still as an individual may want to have corresponding evidence that gels with your coherent web of belief. And Matt's web of belief is tending to naturalism. He says he's a methodological naturalism, although when I hear him speak, it tends to philosophical naturalism. But I'm not going to try to put words in his mouth because, he'll say, well, I'm not a philosophical naturalist. I'm not saying there is no supernatural. But that's because he doesn't like to make any claims. Even though he has said many times that there is no God. He has said that he holds the plausible belief there is no God. Anybody who watches Matt from a very long time ago would know this, but there are people that still argue with that. Matt has never said there's no God. Want to bet? You want to bet? He has. I assure you he has. He used to say it on the Eighth Experience back in the old cable days. But he's walked that back over the years, which is a shame because that's what atheism is. But anyways.
I don't care if everyone says the earth is round. I won't believe it until you take me into space and I see with my own eyes that it's round.
Yeah, I understand what Trent's trying to say here as far as the flat earthers, right? Flat earthers are like, well, I need to see it for myself. But now flat earthers are dealing from our state of irrationality to begin with, right? Flat earthers are ignorant. Flat earthers don't have a basic foundation of any of the actual flat earthers don't have a foundation of any of the sciences, the physics. They're willfully being epistemically closed off, so to speak, from things that we actually know to be science, to be true. Again, you have to take your belief formations and you have to rely on certain things, or else you cannot function in society. I don't have to go measure the circumference of the earth or the radius of the earth or know some experiment to do that will tell me that the earth is round. I'm relying on other people. Why? Because I can look at all the information and all the background history and go, yeah, this corresponds with what I see, and it works. It demonstrates me by a model that this is what would be exactly what I would expect if the earth was round, and the math works. Okay, but flat earthers don't do that. They're already starting at a point of irrationality by not accepting the math or the physics, but they don't understand it. So I kind of disagree with Trent on this one. And Outdone, this you should appreciate that, right? Outdone's out there, and he's just listened to a flat Earth discussion with Reds. I think they would agree that flat Earthers, if they're posed, obviously they're coming from a dishonest place, they're not sincere. But if they're not posed, they're already started with a very fundamentally flawed epistemology and understanding of science. So I don't think this is really a great comparison, Trent.
As we've already seen, much of what we believe involves claims about things we can't personally observe, like subjective experiences or past events. If you
Tiamat says atheist just means you aren't convinced that God exists. No, that's what you think atheism means. That's not what I think atheism means, and neither does philosophy. Right? In philosophy, atheism is normally understood as standard as the belief, the claim, the assertion, the theory, the doctrine, or the dogma that God does not exist. Any of those you'll find in the literature. Do people use it as merely not being convinced? Yes, but that's mostly you find with lay atheists that have no understanding of philosophy or epistemology or nor care. So I don't use atheism that way. If you ask me what my position is, I'm going to tell you I'm not an atheist because I don't hold the position there is no God.
You only believe in things you can visually observe for yourself, then you'll have a ridiculously impoverished view of the world. Finally, one of Dillahunty's most popular quotes is, I want to have as many true beliefs as possible and as few false beliefs as possible.
Yeah, I've heard him say that too. And I kind of agree to some point, but the reality is the more true beliefs you have, you're going to incorporate other things relating to other things that give you false beliefs. We all have false beliefs. All of us have false beliefs. It's just the fact we're not perfect creatures and our belief formation system is wrong. Our memory is extremely fallible. So clearly we have false beliefs. So sure, it'd be nice in theory to have as many truths as possible, but that also means we're going to have more false beliefs as we do.
Now, it's difficult because the more...
No, A in front does not mean that last first. I don't want to get into a whole discussion on atheism, but I'm telling you, that's wrong. A in atheism is a Greek out for privative. The A means not as a negation. I have another video I'm going to do on this, by the way, review on this very thing, because somebody went after Graham Oppie, and I'm like, are you an idiot? You're thinking Graham Oppie is a theist? Because Graham Oppie was trying to explain this very thing. But the A in atheism stands for not as a negation, and you take the negation of the proposition, not of the predication, right? It's disbelief. So atheism does not mean not theism. What it means is negation of the proposition of theism. Any academic will tell you this. Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Roe, any of them will tell you that. So yeah, this misinformation that Matt Dillahunty's been putting out for years, it's starting to catch up with them, because atheists who go investigate this go, damn, that dude was wrong. Yeah, the A means not as a negation, and negation is always on the proposition, not of the predication. Very simple mistake that many atheists make. It's not their fault, because they just learned it from watching some cable access show, instead of go looking into themselves. But yeah, it's not just merely unbelief, it's disbelief.
The more you try to get true beliefs, the more false ones will creep in. And the more you try to shut out false beliefs, the more you're going to accidentally shut out true beliefs.
That's true too.
I think many atheists only see the harm in believing false statements, and they see no harm in failing to believe true statements. But we can be harmed if we miss out on the goods that come from the truth. For example, if we're overly skeptical of vaccines and medicine, we can miss out on the preventions and cures they offer and needlessly suffer.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. And also, it might be beneficial sometimes to have false beliefs. Sometimes having a false belief is beneficial, especially if we're trying to do pain avoidance or to hurt somebody else. We convince ourselves all the times of things that may not be true, and a lot of times that's self-preservation mechanisms. The whole tiger in the bush kind of thing. It may not be a tiger, but we've convinced ourselves it's a tiger. But for our own safety, we take precautions. We have pragmatic reasons. So just because we have a false belief does not necessarily mean a bad thing. And it certainly can be argued that even false beliefs can have beneficial things in evolution and in just coping, in psychology, and dealing with other people. It really depends on the belief.
Likewise, if we're overly skeptical of...
So somebody asks, what should be called if you aren't convinced that God exists? Well, the logic is simple. It was what's called the law of negation. A or not A. Theist or not theist. That's it. Anything after that, you're just doing semantic substitutions. But A equals, if you have A as theist, A or not A, not theist. So anybody who doesn't believe in a God is not a theist. That doesn't tell you much, though. Everything has a complementary set. Duck, not duck. Well, if you're not in the set of duck, what are you? Well, you're in the set of not duck, but I don't know if you're a chicken or a human or a car or what. All I know is you're not a duck. So complementary sets of the negation don't tell us a hell of a lot of information, right? Just because you're not a theist doesn't tell me much. It doesn't tell me what your actual position is.
Religious claims. We can miss out on the spiritual benefits that they give us when they prevent and cure spiritual afflictions. In closing, I'd exhort atheists to not become the mirror image of Christian fundamentalists. I
love this part here.
And for Christians to not become fundamentalists. Don't embrace absolutist cliches that sound great, but are completely wrong. Whether it's a Christian cliche like the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it, or an atheist cliche like claims aren't evidence. Instead, take a nuanced approach. Some claims about what happened in the past are false or unprovable, and some are true or at least believable. What we should do is carefully follow the evidence, which includes taking claims seriously and not immediately dismissing them just because they don't conform to our present understanding of the world. And we should be open to revising our understanding about reality because the world is kind of a weird place.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave it there, then he logs off. Absolutely agree with him. That's called belief revisionism, revision of your beliefs, belief revisionism. Basically, we should always constantly, on certain beliefs, reevaluate them as we get more information. Our brain does this automatically. Most of us does some subconsciously. Just like in dosastic and voluntarism, our brain does all this work and then tells us what our belief is, right? We don't do a lot of the work. Our brain does almost all of it subconsciously, right? So as Dunn said, yes, there's three epistemic dispositions. There's believes the proposition. There's disbelieve the proposition, which Matt Dillahunty has gone wrong. I wrote a whole blog entry on that because he didn't understand disbelief. He tried to explain to a caller that new philosophy that disbelief merely meant does not believe. That's wrong. I have tons of evidence that is wrong, all the way from going back 400 years, not just from Century Encyclopedia, but also peer-reviewed papers. Disbelief means to believe negation. Disbelief means to believe not P. So you have believe P, believe not P, which is disbelieve P, and then you have neither believe P or not P, which is agnostic position. This is standard in philosophy. Anywhere you go, this is what you learn. Any college is going to teach this. It's nothing new. It's nothing mind-blowing. It's just a lot of atheists were never exposed to this because they only listen to Matt Dillahunty, who conflates these things together and tries to tell people, oh yeah, all agnostics are atheists. No, that's BS. Absolute BS. So you're not a theist. A means not. Yeah, not the but proposition, right? And by the way, not A. I could use anything for the A. I'm just using that as a variable. B or not B, right? A, you're confusing A as a set with the Greek alpha primitive, Hamilton. Big difference. So B or not B, if you want to do it that, if this confuses you, B or not B. B is everything that's in the set. Anything that's not in that set is what's called in the complementary set, and those two sets are in the universal set. So every universe has a dichotomous set of subsets where you have the belief, the existence of something and the non-existence of something. Duck, not duck. God, not God. God exists, God does not exist. These are all dichotomous. So what do you want to call something that's not a duck? Well, it's just not a duck. I'm not a duck. I'm not in the set of things that are a duck. Duck or not duck. B or not B. And I'm using B as a variable. Right? Theist or not theist. Simple as that. It's just basic set. But, okay, so first says out of the dictionary, one who believes in the existence of God, especially one who believes in the personal God. Those are what's called classical theism versus non-classical theism. Classical theism believes in a personalized God. Non-classical theism does not. Non-classical theism could be any God that exists. Okay? It could be any type of deity. So the classical theist will hold that God is a personalized deity that has an individual relationship with a person, but a non-classical theist would not necessarily have to hold to that limitation, right? A non-classical theist, Zeus would be a god, right? So you got to be really careful with your usages there, right? Same thing to understand that if you go to Academia EDU and you type my name, I wrote an essay called By Definition that explains that definitions are descriptive, not prescriptive, and the English language does not prescribe usages. So when you read something out of a dictionary, it's just telling you how the word is being used. And it's used what's called synchronically, meaning in this period of time, rather diachronically, which is over time. And so whenever you read a dictionary, you can't look at a dictionary and go, this is what this word means, and you have to use it this way, and this is prescribing the usage. No, it just means that there are people that use atheism to mean does not believe in God. That is true. I'm not one of those people. And neither is most of my audience that are atheists because they're educated. Yeah. Yeah, Kimo's right. Non-theist is vapid. It tells you really very nothing, right? What type of non-theist are you? I mean, and I've also proven logically that if you don't believe, that's ambiguous. Another thing Matt can't understand. And by the way, I think Matt has heard of my paper, and I'm pretty sure he's been told my paper is correct. You don't ever see Matt or Aaron talking about my logical arguments, right? Because they've been told by experts, yeah, Steve's right on this. But they can't ever do it in public because if they evaluated my work in public, the experts would eviscerate them because they would be lying, right? They'd be getting it wrong, I'm sure. They have no evidence, and they have no evidence against my at least no meaningful evidence against my arguments. They could say, well, this person said it's wrong. Sure, that's evidence against my paperwork, my proof, sure. But is it strong evidence? No. What's stronger? Academic scholars, atheists and theists who agree with me, or some random person that says it's wrong? And by the way, that's actually the reason why Matt Dillahunty blocked me, believe it or not. Because he thought I was making an argument that I wasn't making. He thought I was appealing to authorities by saying that people, who should we listen to? I was like, who should I listen to more, the experts or people that are non-experts working at gas stations? I'm not saying that people that are working at gas stations cannot know these things. I'm not an expert. But my point was, if you have a medical condition, who are you going to listen to? Doctors, right? Or some random people that have no medical experience? Who are you going to listen to? You're going to listen to the doctors. This was the point I was making to Matt Dillahunty. And Matt Dillahunty twisted my words and tried to make it sound, oh, well, Steve was demeaning to people that are not, educated in it. That's not what I was saying at all. I'm just saying if you're going to evaluate my work, why would I take the opinion of somebody like Matt Dillahunty, who gets things wrong about philosophy a lot, or Aaron Ra, over the experts in philosophy and logic who have evaluated my work. Dr. Pi has evaluated my work, he has a blog on my review of my work. Yeah, so that was my argument to Matt, and Matt blocked me over that because he had no argument at that point, right? Matt cannot properly evaluate my paper. What is he going to say about it? You know. So, can one of my mods link my paper if they can? I don't know. I don't have the wherewithal right now. I guess do it. Then I'll wrap it up. All right. So, we got any questions? What do you guys think about this? What do you think about Trent's arguments here? Again, Trent is a learned guy, right? I mean, say what you want about religion or Catholicism. I'm not Catholic. People know I've had some issues with Catholicism, but you know, I don't care whether he's a Catholic or not. What he had to say was right. Trent was spot on the money here, and I think it would really be a disservice to atheists for not to take him seriously. That's my paper right there. Van Veen, whenever I have a toothache, I consult my mechanic because I never want to appeal to an authority. Yeah, I don't get that all the time. I have people on Facebook telling me, you're just appealing to authority. There is something called legitimate appeal to authority, or legitimate argumentum ad verecundium, which means I am taking the authority as buttressing my argument. If I were to say my argument is true because Dr. Pi said it's true, that's fallacious. But if I were to say, I'm asserting my argument is true. Here's the proof for my argument. Here's my paper. And these experts agree with me. Those are buttressing the fact that they've evaluated. This is what peer review process is. You know, or when you write a paper, you have citations of actual experts. And so there are legitimate times to appeal to authority. Well, how do you know your paper is correct? Well, I had people that knew what they were doing evaluated it. What's wrong with that? Who else am I going to have evaluated? You know, how do you know this person has cancer? Well, the doctors did these tests. We assume the doctors know what they're doing and that can test for these things, and based upon their expertise, this person has cancer. We do that all the time. We appeal to authority. Nothing wrong with that. That's not a fallacy to do that. Right? What makes an appeal to authority fallacy a fallacy is one of only a handful of things. One, the expert is not an expert in that particular field, or there may not be an expert at all. Two, the expert has not evaluated the claim. If I were to say, hey, how do you know your mechanic, how do you know, Van Veen, how do you know that your car needs brakes? Well, my mechanic said so. And I said, well, did your mechanic look at your car? No. Then how are you appealing to him? Right? That's a fallacious appeal to authority. Or if you say something along the lines, well, it is true because this person said so. That's a fallacious true. If you even say, look, it is the case that my car needs brake pads because my mechanic said so, that actually is fallacious. But if you said, hey, look, I'm convinced that my car needs brake pads because my mechanic told me so, that's not fallacious. Or you can check them yourself with calipers, right? And they got this, they're worn down. There's nothing left. There's metal contact. But yeah, a lot of people misunderstand that particular fallacy. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. Any last minute questions? I enjoyed this. I got 2 more reviews to do. I might do one later on tonight because I'm going to be here by myself tonight. And I do have to open tomorrow, but I got some time in my hands. I am off this Thursday and Friday, so I will be doing non sequitur. I was supposed to do it today with Reds, but Reds had to do that debate with that flat earther, and it ran long. So that was no big deal with that. I am going to have probably Reds on non sequitur to kind of discuss more about the state of debate with flat earthers. We have a hard time finding anybody that really wants to argue with Reds on YouTube. They'll do it in Twitter Spaces, and I don't know why, but they're running. Flat earthers are running. They're just not as prevalent as they once were. And yes, I know many of them are dying off. A nod to Bob. I just don't know how Bob Goodell. How do you pass his last name? Passed away. But the non-flat earthers out there have a debt to pay to him because Bob demonstrated the earth isn't flat. He was a flat earther that actually demonstrated that the earth was not flat, which was really impressive. And he spent $15,000-$20,000 to do it. So Yeah, flat earthers dying, and I think because like I said, YouTube is getting away from it. They're not being promoted as they once were, and so I will ask Outdone, if I go and listen to that discussion with Reds, am I going to be like bashing my head against the wall? Is this guy a Poe or is he an actual flat earther? And creationism, I think, is dying too. I haven't done much in creationism lately. Creationism is so hard because there's so many things to really kind of dive into. My last episode on Non Sequitur on creationism, I had brought in Dr. Hugh Ross, and we had talked about Jason Lyle's theories. But there's a lot of complexities when trying to explain to people why creationism is wrong when they start shrouding out their experts and why they have all these massive genetic stuff and biology stuff that the average person isn't going to know much about. I don't know enough about genetics to talk about Sanford's genetic entropy. I know enough genetics to describe to somebody how DNA works and how cells kind of replicate that and basic stuff, but it requires a lot more education on these topics to deal with the higher level stuff. And matter of fact, that's a good segue to the next video that I'll be reviewing if I do it tonight, which will be Emerson's Green's video on why people think they've refuted something by going after the low-hanging fruit, or what I call fruit on the ground. I used to have a series way back when on my channel. You can still find it, it's still there, but it's called Fruit on the Ground Creationist. It was the really early days of YouTube. But he makes a point, just because you refute creationism doesn't mean you're refuting that there's a God. You're not refuting that argument. Now, I do think it lends evidence that there isn't a God, and you can certainly make that argument. If you can show creationism is true, yeah, that is evidence there is no God. But you cannot make an absolute conclusion, right? And so when you're going against these low-hanging fruits of these flat earthers or creationists that don't even know their own arguments, what are you really accomplishing? If you really want to debunk creationism, you need to go after the Jeffrey Tompkins of the world. You need to go after the Snellings of the world. Andrew Snellings. You want to go after even my friend Dr. Jonathan Sarfati, and I'm sure he'd be up for it. I mean, he's, like I said, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met, but he's a creationist. You want to go against their arguments, just like we went against Jason Lyle's argument with Dr. Ross, showing that his argument wasn't a great argument. Was it true? Sure, it's a convention, but it doesn't at all demonstrate a flat Earth, and that's what I think he was misleading people on. So those are the things you want to go against, and very few of us have the skill set to do that, unless you're like a gut sick Gibbon. I always get her name wrong, and I apologize. Gut sick Gibbon. She knows her stuff when it goes to anthropology and biology, and she's really good at going after the creationist. Apologia is really good at going against creationism and theologians. I just don't have the skill set, and I admit that. I have one niche, and that's maybe nuclear stuff. I did my presentation on polonium halos. It's still there. I did get involved with Dr. Hankey and Dr. Lachelt, and we talked about the helium diffusion rates, which was still a little bit out of my depths. But I did know about polonium halos pretty well at one time. So my presentation against that's still up there. But that's really the only thing that I really felt comfortable having a presentation on, because I happen to be, a little bit of background nuclear stuff. But other than that, it's hard. It's hard to have these videos on creationism because the creationists are getting better at obfuscating. They're getting better at having more technical arguments that they know the average person isn't going to be able to get to. And even the lay people like myself, it takes a lot of effort to go in, see their argument, find the flaws in their argument, and then be able to explain to the average person those things. It's not easy. So Outdone says, no, wait, Steve should watch it because a flat earther claimed he was coming at it from a philosophical perspective. Oh, no. Genetic entropy doesn't exist. I am convinced of that, and that's only on the limited understanding I have of genetics, right? But I mean, when you start getting mutation rates and other things, I don't have the experience to explain to people why that's such bogus nonsense. But I am convinced there's no such thing as genetic entropy. Yeah. All right. Anyways, thank you for Siggy for those gifts for membership. Christopher, Canadian Atheist. Hey, congratulations, man. And I want to thank my mods. If you got any questions, please leave them in the comments section. If you wanted to donate on the channel itself, you could do it through the comments now. The super thanks. I will be reading those out when I get them. Siggy gifted 10 more memberships. There's not 10 more people. That's going to go on next time, Siggy. Oh, there might be. There's Flanker outdone. He's just trying to make that sound. I think you've got to accept it, and if you want it. If not, I'll go on the next time. But thank you, Siggy. Flanker says, Steve, what's your thoughts on that? The trend of anti-science in social media. There's so much different disinformation. It's easy to break glass and hard to clean it up. Yeah, unfortunately, social media allows for people to put out misinformation with impunity a lot of times. They hide behind avatars. I put out my information. I mean, I am my name. You can go find me. Right? Everything I do is under my real name. And the problem with that is that you have dishonest players that attack the person rather than the argument. Right? And it's very easy for flat earthers and creationists to put out this information without being challenged because of the availability of social media. Now, one of the things I've been talking about recently that is blowing up on my Twitter, I'm pretty sure I have my link to my Twitter in the video description. If you're not on Twitter, you're missing out, and my Facebook, because I talk a lot on those platforms. So if you're not following me on Twitter, you're really missing out. But we're talking about a lot of the transgender stuff still, and unfortunately, I side with the doctors like Fonda Beatles and Colin Wright. I have my own opinion on these things, and some people agree with me, some people don't. But when I see people putting out bad scientific information because they've cited some journal that they didn't read, I'm like, oh, come on. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen somebody cite a journal out of Scientific America and Nature. Well, I literally have shown the author telling these people that they're wrong in tweets. But they'll still cite them because they're not understanding what they're reading. So unfortunately, there's a lot of anti-scientific rhetoric out there. And I mean, Siggy and I have been gone back and forth a lot on this. Matter of fact, this is how I know Siggy. We disagree, but I got a little respect for the guy. He's able to have a conversation. He doesn't. We don't devolve into, diatribe and rhetoric, and that's what I'm looking for. And so, even though like Siggy and I may disagree on a lot of this stuff, there's a conversation to be had there. And unfortunately, there's a lot of dishonest agents out there that are not looking for those kind of engagements, not looking for those types of honest discourse. And they put out misinformation, and then they just retreat to their echo chambers, right? So, yeah, and like my mod disagrees with me. People say, "Oh, your mods can't disagree with me." Have you met me? Yeah, April disagrees with me. Like I said, I am convinced that Dylan is a dishonest agent, which is for another video. And by the way, if he goes through with a bunch of, if he does a full transition surgery, then I'll walk it back. I've said I would. I will walk back and I will formally apologize to him on air. I will do this. I give him my word, if he does full transition. Because he already said he was going to do surgery back in December, and he didn't. It's now, I don't know, April, right? Soon to be May. Now, again, that's not the fact that somebody has to do that to be trans, but he did say he was going to do it, right? He said this. Right? He literally had said by December. And so I just don't think he's honest, because a person who says they're going to do something but doesn't follow through with it, I'm going to add that in my belief box of why I'm questioning them. Right? But I'm happy to walk that back and apologize if I'm wrong on that. I really am. So Sagan says, thanks, man. Now I think I understand this better than I did. I appreciate it very much. Hail Sagan. There you go. I appreciate it. That's the point of these reviews. And I got 2 more videos that I will be doing. Maybe I'll do one late tonight for the UK people. A lot of them show up about 4 o'clock my time, AM. They're like noon their time. And I have one from Emerson Green that I want to do. I have one from this guy named Professor Pink, I think his name is. He bizarrely, again, put Dr. Oppie as a theist. So I'm going to be doing that one. I'm not sure which one I'll do in first, or if I'm going to do one tonight. If not, I do get off early tomorrow, relatively speaking, 5. And And so I probably will stream tomorrow night and maybe even Sunday morning. So I got to get some streams out. I got to get these things out there because I really want people to get something from them. And the fact that Siggy learned something more about the nature of beliefs and how belief formation, and that Matt Dillahunty is just wrong on this stuff, that to me is worth it. It really is. It really is. If one person just goes, dang, Steve, yeah, you know what? I thought about this and your argument has convinced me. That's cool. That's really cool. I really wish Matt would be more open to revising his beliefs. And I really wish Matt would, be honest enough to admit that I'm right about a lot of things that he just will not address. I've only had a conversation with him once. That was on the Non Sequitur show. And I did confirm with him. And I was like, hey, do you still believe that agnostic atheism is nonsensical? And he confirmed, yeah. So I know that to be the case. He's talked about that afterwards. But yeah, it was my arguments that convinced him. I'm clear on that. I mean, because it's everything. Anytime you hear the term agnostic atheist, arguments against it, it's literally stuff that came from my blog. I don't know who else does it, and answers the reason, but they also started to, because they're like, oh yeah, this is BS. So, and April says, oh okay. She says if he goes back to boy mode, I'll be first to apologize. Deal. And we'll see what happens. He can play it out for years, by the way. But if he might just go back to being a gay man, right? He might just go, hey, look, you know what? I'm more comfortable as a gay man. Or he might be fully because he said, like I said, Dylan said was going to fully transition, bottom surgery and everything. I'm not making this up. So, but even still, there's a discussion to be had there. We are talking about trans in athletes. There's a discussion to be had there. And we like the discussions without the hyperbole. As soon as people start throwing out words like bigot or transphobe, I just tune out. I have no interest. You're not going to be able to have a conversation with me if you start off with being hyperbolic. I like the other day on my Facebook, April, I literally had somebody tell me I was racist for using the term flying monkey from the abuse by proxy cycle, right? The abuse by proxy cycle is something that narcissists do. And one of the things they do is they, make some false claim. They ramp it up on social media, then they send their flying monkeys over to attack you, right? We all know this. But somebody said that's racist. And I'm like, you're an idiot. And they were trying to claim that I was racist. And I'm like, you're an idiot. I'm not going to have a reasonable conversation with somebody that stupid, right? And that's what unfortunately shuts down conversations, when they're incapable of actually talking about the actual topic. So I appreciate the good dialogue. I appreciate the people on Twitter and in my comment section that have been really challenging me, but in a very fair and honest way. I have a person I've been going back and forth for a few weeks now, and I got to respond to her. But she's trans, and she was real. At first, she was asking me my positions, which I respected. Asking me why I believe that I did. I totally respected. We've been engaging on certain usages of terms and. Just overall having a really great discussion in writing. And I look forward to, I was looking forward to her response on some things, because like, okay, what about this, and we're talking about that. It's so polite and so unlike what you find with the visceral from people that are on Twitter. That just basically says, oh, well, if you don't believe this, you're an evil human being and, you're transphobe. It doesn't work like that. That's not how you convince. But even if you were right, that wouldn't convince anybody. What convinces somebody is somebody like the person I'm talking to, who is trans, who's making some very valid, interesting points. We're having a very good dialogue. That's what I'm looking for. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And I see that with more and more people. And the ones that I don't see it with, I don't have a conversation with. Right? So... yeah, April, exactly. Let's leave it there because you're spot on. I said something about flying monkeys, and this person flying monkeys, he literally tagged people. He tagged people in to have flying monkeys going, oh, look at Steve. He's using the term flying monkeys to a black man. I'm like, first of all, I didn't know he was black. And second of all, I wouldn't have cared because that's not a racist term. Right? There's nothing. People know I live with a black woman that's my sister. She's family to me. People know I'm attracted to black women. People know that I'm the antithesis of racist. And so for somebody to say you're racist by using a term that deals with narcissism and then literally does what that term means blows my mind. And yes, I've been on my Facebook. I have people on my Facebook going back 50 years. I got literally my first two babysitters from 50 years ago on my Facebook. And so people know me in this town. People know me. People know me for 20, 30, 40 years. Not a single person in my life have ever said I was racist. Not a single solitary person that I've ever met in my life that I could ever recall that knew me. Maybe because I'm a stranger, whatever. But I mean, people that know me, nobody. It would never happen. But you get some stranger off the internet that says you use the term flying monkey and all of a sudden you're racist. You got to be out of your mind. Anyways, John Foley, good to see you. We are wrapping this up. I might have a stream later for the UK crowd. I might do a second part to this on another video review because I'm going to wrap this up. But I don't know. If it depends, I'm going to be awake tonight. If not, I'm going to be doing it tomorrow and or Sunday. So UK crowd, I'm trying to send things your way. With that, though, I'm going to wrap this up. My throat's getting dry. Siggy, thank you for the awesome donations. Really appreciate it. And for the memberships. All the ones that you just had, they're going to go through next time, I think. If somebody didn't get it this time, because I didn't see them come up. They've actually got to click accept it. And so right now it's saturated. So then the people that come in next time, when they accept it, they'll get the memberships. So I will let them know that was from you, Siggy. And with that, thank you guys for watching. Again, please leave comments and share this video. If you really want to help me out, share the video everywhere. Share all my videos. Get them out there. Get my paper out there. Because like I said, I will be on Dr. Braxton Hunter's channel on the 28th, and we'll be discussing my paper because he agrees with it, and he wants to promote it to his theist audience because no atheist to date has shown that it's wrong, and I don't think that they can. Yeah, I don't think I mean, at this point, I'm going to believe that they can't, but if you want to prove me wrong, go for it, but so far nobody has, and when you have Dr. Pai's review was very clear that it's legit and it's true. So anyways, thanks, John. Thanks, Siggy. Thanks, April. Thanks, everybody else. I'm going to sleep for a little while. Then we'll see if I want to stream later. Okay? And good night. Share my video. Thank you, Dr. Trent. Good night. Oh, I'm sorry. Not a doctor. He's a master's degree. Thank you. Thank you, Trent.